Tonight, you'll drift into a war that never truly ended. Not on the battlefield, but in the hearts of those who came home hollow. His name was Heinrich, a soldier who marched through the snow long after the fighting stopped, carrying 2 letters, one written for love, and one written for forgiveness. You'll follow him through trenches of ice, across fields of glass where the dead still shine beneath the frost. You'll hear the quiet sound of men turning snow into survival, of promises written with shaking hands, and of words that outlived their writers. And when silence finally falls, when the wind stops and the snow begins to dream, you'll find yourself wondering, if no one reads a letter, does it still speak? Close your eyes, breathe. Let SnoozyTor guide you through the last march, into the white, where even ghosts sleep. The train screeched into Stalingrad beneath a sky that looked bruised. Ash fell like snow and snow fell like ash. Heinrich Adler pressed his gloved hand against the fogged window, watching the shapes of ruined buildings drift past, black ribs jutting from a white body. He'd imagined the front lines differently. Banners, triumph, maybe even glory. What he found instead was silence, the kind that hums inside your skull when the world has given up. The platform was crowded with soldiers who no longer looked like men. Their eyes were hollow, their faces stiff with frost. A medic stumbled by, muttering something about morphine, about pain he couldn't count. When Heinrich stepped down from the carriage, his boots sank into snow that had frozen red. The cold bit through his coat before he'd even taken his second breath. "First time, Adler?" his sergeant barked, a cigarette clinging to his lips. Heinrich nodded. "Then you'll need this." The man reached into his pocket and tossed him a small metal tin. Inside, a few pale tablets rattled softly, Pervidin. "The Führer's courage," the sergeant said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "1 pill and you'll march like the devil himself." Heinrich didn't ask questions. He placed the tin into his breast pocket, next to the photo of his wife, Clara. The 2 items touched like strange companions, love and oblivion. By nightfall, the unit had reached the edge of the city. Ruined factories jutted into the wind like teeth. The Volga was frozen solid, a mirror for the burning sky. Heinrich stared into that horizon and thought, this is the end of the world. When he finally took his first pill, the bitterness bit his tongue, and the cold in his veins began to melt. His breath quickened. The snow no longer looked like death. It shimmered, glittering, alive. He laughed softly, surprising himself. It felt like waking up from a long dream, but the dream was better than this. A nearby soldier whispered, "Doesn't it feel good? Like you can finally breathe." Heinrich nodded, though the breath that filled his lungs wasn't air. It was fire. That night, no one slept. The entire squad sat awake, eyes wide, grinning through cracked lips, murmuring jokes into the dark. They said the pills made them see clearer, but the clarity felt cruel. Every sound was sharper, the crunch of snow, the hum of the wind, the distant wails of the wounded. Heinrich could hear everything. Even the silence had a heartbeat. He leaned against the trench wall and thought of Clara. Would she recognize him if she saw him now? Face pale, pupils blown wide like a wolf's in the dark? Would she understand what it takes to stay awake in hell? There's a question that lingers even now. If staying awake means surviving, would you dare to close your eyes? Would you trade sleep, that soft mercy, for one more night alive? The sky flared suddenly, artillery fire painting the clouds orange. Heinrich didn't flinch. The pill kept his nerves still, his heart steady. He watched the horizon burn and whispered, almost lovingly, "Now I understand what they meant by the 1,000-year fire." When dawn came, it didn't feel like morning, only another layer of gray. The squad began their march deeper into the ruins. Heinrich clutched his rifle and the tin of tablets, feeling both grow warm against his chest. He wondered as the wind tore through his coat. Was this courage, or was it just chemistry pretending to be hope? The second morning came with no sunrise. Only a thin light, the color of ash, spilled through the broken clouds. Heinrich's fingers were stiff as he laced his boots. He hadn't slept, but he didn't feel tired. The pill still hummed in his blood, a steady electric calm. He could hear his heartbeat like a drum keeping rhythm for a march that never ends. In the trench, men whispered about home. Letters had arrived from Berlin, crumpled, damp, smelling faintly of oil and tobacco. Heinrich unfolded his own and traced Clara's handwriting. She wrote of ration lines, of blackouts, of their son learning his first words. He smiled, though the smile cracked his frozen lips. He wanted to reply to tell her he was strong. But strength here wasn't measured by muscles or metals. It was measured by how many pills you could take before you shook apart. He placed one on his tongue. The bitterness bit back. The world sharpened again. Every snowflake, every spark of light off a rifle barrel. Suddenly he could see far, too far. The ruined street stretched endlessly, a maze of smoke and bone. He whispered to himself, "I can do this." He believed it for now. Around him the squad was changing. Voices rose in laughter that sounded too loud, too bright. One soldier swore he could see angels gliding through the snow, their wings catching the light of distant flares. Another said he hadn't blinked in 20 hours and felt invincible. Heinrich only watched, realizing that invincibility and madness might wear the same face. The sergeant handed out another round of tablets. "March begins in 30 minutes. Take 2 if you're tired," he said. No one was tired. No one admitted it anyway. They chewed the pills like candy, eyes wild, smiles wide. Heinrich wrote another letter before the order came. His pencil shook from the cold, or maybe from the drug. He couldn't tell anymore. He told Clara that the snow was beautiful, that the stars here were brighter than in Berlin. He lied about the warmth, the food, the laughter. He didn't mention the taste of metal in the air, or how his teeth ached from grinding. When he sealed the envelope, a drop of blood fell from his cracked thumb. He wiped it away and wondered if she would notice. Would she smell the powder on the paper, the faint chemical scent of something not quite human? Would she believe his words or read the tremor between the lines? The march began. Boots sank into the snow with dull rhythm. The cold pressed close, but the pill burned hotter inside him than fire ever could. He moved like a ghost through a frozen dream, part of a line of men who no longer looked real. Every so often he caught himself smiling for no reason. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the pill, maybe the madness. He thought of Clara again, her voice sang softly, "Come home soon." And he whispered back, though no one could hear, "I will, my love. I'll bring the winter with me." There's a question that the silence asked him then. If courage can be swallowed, is it still courage at all? Or just another way to hide the fear that refuses to die? As night crept back across the city, Heinrich stared into the dark sky. Somewhere beyond the smoke, stars still burned. He imagined one belonged to him, small, trembling, but still alive. He took another pill, closed his eyes, and felt nothing. The first thing Heinrich noticed was the sound. Not the guns, they came and went like thunder. But the echo, the hollow voice of a city that refused to die. Every footstep came back twice. Every word he spoke seemed to linger in the smoke before fading into the snow. Stalingrad wasn't a place anymore. It was a wound that wouldn't close. Walls leaned at broken angles, staircases led to nowhere, and every shadow could have been a soldier or a ghost. Heinrich walked through what had once been a factory floor, stepping over frozen bodies still clutching wrenches and rifles. The snow covered everything but didn't purify it, it only preserved the horror. He passed a window without glass. A rag fluttered there like a flag of surrender. Somewhere above, a piano played one single, trembling note, the wind dragging its fingers across broken strings. He stopped listening. For a moment, he thought he heard his own name whispered from the ruins. He turned, rifle raised. No one was there. Only the smoke curling like a hand around his face. He swallowed hard and reached into his pocket. The tin was warm against his chest. One pill. Just one. He hesitated, then let it rest on his tongue. The bitterness spread again, sharp, comforting, familiar. The whispering stopped. His comrades trudged behind him, coughing, muttering prayers in half-sleep. Their breath came out white, their eyes black-rimmed. One of them, a boy barely 18, laughed suddenly. "Saw my mother," he said. "She was sitting by the fire. She waved at me." No one answered. No one wanted to break the illusion. Heinrich wondered if he'd see Clara too. Would she come walking through the snow, her hair dusted white, her hands warm? Would she call his name in that soft Berlin accent, as if the world had never burned? He almost wanted her to, almost. A shell landed nearby, shaking the street. Dust rained down from the roof, covering his helmet. When the echo faded, silence returned, thicker, deeper, endless. It was a silence that seemed to breathe. He whispered, "It's listening to us." The man beside him frowned. "What is?" "The city," Heinrich said. "Can't you hear it breathing?" The soldier only laughed. "You need sleep." Heinrich smiled weakly. Sleep. What was that word anymore? As night fell, they set up camp inside a burned-out school. Desks overturned, chalk frozen on the board mid-sentence. Der Krieg wird gewonnen. The war will be won. He stared at the words until they blurred into ghosts. He wondered who had written them. A teacher, a child, someone who still believed in victory? He reached for another pill, then stopped. Not yet. Outside, the wind howled through the empty hallways, whispering the same syllables over and over. Names maybe. Or prayers. Heinrich pulled his coat tighter, his breath misting the air. And for a heartbeat, he imagined the city whispering his own name again. Not out of malice, but out of recognition. As if it knew he would never leave. There's a question he didn't dare speak aloud. When a place has swallowed enough dead, does it start to remember their names? And when it remembers yours, can you ever escape it? He closed his eyes, the echoes still humming in his ears. Sleep didn't come. Only the sound of breathing, his own and the city's, perfectly in sync. By the fourth night, no one in the unit remembered how to sleep. They spoke of it the way starving men speak of food, something that once existed somewhere long ago. The eyes of every soldier burned with the same wild shimmer, pupils wide, minds humming like exposed wires. Heinrich lay against a frozen sandbag wall, staring up at the colorless sky. He tried to count his breaths, tried to slow them, but each inhale only brought more of the bitter taste that clung to his tongue. The pills had made him strong, or so they said, but now his hands trembled when he was still. His heartbeat filled the spaces where silence should have been. Across the trench, one man whispered hymns under his breath. Another was laughing softly at nothing. They called it courage. They called it willpower. But Heinrich knew it was something else, an orchestra of nerves stretched to breaking. Even the sergeant's voice, usually sharp, had softened into a slur. At dawn, the snow began again. Thick, quiet, endless. It covered the ground, the rifles, even the bodies that hadn't yet been buried. Heinrich brushed flakes from his eyelids, wondering what it might feel like to let them stay, to lie still and let the world bury him gently instead of violently. He reached for his tin, but the pills were nearly gone. He tapped one into his palm and stared at it for a long time. The small white circle looked innocent, almost holy. A miracle in miniature, or a curse. He placed it on his tongue anyway because that's what everyone did. And when the warmth returned to his chest, he thought, maybe this is what belief feels like. The boy who had spoken of his mother earlier was sitting nearby, eyes wide and red. He muttered something about seeing lights in the snow. Lanterns? Heinrich asked. The boy shook his head. No. Watching. Heinrich said nothing. He didn't want to look. They all knew what exhaustion could do, what the pills could hide. But no one dared to stop. To stop meant the cold would win. To stop meant your heart would remember it was tired. That night, when the shooting paused, the men sat together around a candle. The flame bent sideways in the wind, trembling like them. Someone began to tell a story about Berlin. The warm cafes, the perfume in the air, the laughter that used to fill the streets. Heinrich closed his eyes, imagining it. The smell of coffee. The weight of normalcy. The sound of Clara's shoes on the floorboards. For a moment, the war faded. Then the candle hissed and went out. Darkness swallowed them whole. In that dark, no one spoke. They could feel each other's breathing, hear the faint grind of teeth. Heinrich thought, we've become shadows pretending to be men. They didn't fight the enemy anymore. They fought sleep itself. He glanced up at the sky, where snowflakes spiraled endlessly. He wondered if anyone back home looked at the same sky, or if the world he left behind had already forgotten how to dream. Do you know what it feels like when your body wants to sleep but your mind refuses to let go? When your thoughts hum louder than the world around you, and you start to believe the silence is whispering your name. Heinrich smiled faintly. Sleep had become the enemy now, and the pills, his truest comrades. As the night stretched thin, the city breathed beneath them, slow and patient. Heinrich whispered to the snow, not yet, not tonight. And somewhere in the dark, the echo answered back, then stay awake, forever. The next morning, the order came to write home. A brief hour of silence. No gunfire, no shouting, just men hunched over scraps of paper like monks in a ruined monastery. Ink froze in their pens. Fingers cracked and bled. But still they wrote. Heinrich stared at the sheet in front of him. The page trembled with each breath he took, and so did his hand. He had written dozens of letters before, each one sounding less like truth and more like a prayer wrapped in lies. "Dear Clara," he began, "the snow is not so bad now. We have food, warmth, and good company." The words looked fine. The words looked human. But his reflection in the ink, hollow-eyed, gaunt, betrayed him. Around him, pens scratched against paper. Some men whispered their words aloud as they wrote, as if speaking them might make them real. One soldier kissed the corner of his letter before folding it, as though the gesture could carry him home. Another soaked his page in cigarette smoke, muttering, "So she'll know it came from me." Heinrich smiled at that, the small absurd rituals that kept them believing they still belonged to someone. He took out his tin. One pill left. He broke it in half, swallowed the smaller piece, and waited for the fire to rise in his chest again. It came slowly now, like a dying engine. But it came. His thoughts sharpened, his heart steadied, and his handwriting straightened just enough to look deliberate. He wrote of courage, of discipline. He wrote that he felt strong, stronger than ever. He wrote that victory was near, that he could almost hear the bells of Berlin ringing through the snow. He wrote every word she wanted to believe. And as he did, he felt something strange. Not guilt, that had frozen weeks ago, but tenderness. A quiet ache for the world beyond the trenches. The world where letters didn't lie. When he signed his name, a small drop of sweat fell onto the page. Heinrich hesitated, then took the half-pilled dust that remained on his fingertip and smeared it across the paper. A pale stain spread like frost. "So you'll know I'm still awake," he whispered. The man beside him, Otto, leaned over. "She'll smell the chemicals before she smells the ink," he joked, his laughter hollow. Heinrich smiled. "At least she'll know I'm alive." Otto nodded, though neither of them were sure what that meant anymore. Outside, snow began to fall again. The commissar collected the letters, promising to send them when possible. Everyone knew what that meant. Most would never leave the city. But still, men handed their envelopes over like offerings to a god that no longer listened. When Heinrich's turn came, he hesitated. He almost wanted to keep it, to clutch the paper like a relic, proof that he had once had someone to write to. Then he let it go. The commissar's gloved hand closed around it, and it vanished into the stack. He watched the man walk away and felt a hollowness he couldn't name. It wasn't fear or regret or sorrow. It was something quieter, the sound of hope dissolving. He looked down at his empty tin. The wind caught the edge of the page he'd been using as a pad, flipping it over. The back was blank, perfect white. For a moment he thought about starting another letter, one with the truth. But what truth could he write? That the snow had become a graveyard? That courage came in pills, not hearts? That every sunrise looked like surrender? He reached for his pencil, but his fingers refused to move. So he just stared until the page blurred. Then, softly, he whispered into the still air. "If a lie keeps her warm, is it still a sin?" The question drifted away, unclaimed. And the snow kept falling, silent, endless, honest. By the time the next night fell, the cold had learned their names. It crept into their boots, their coats, their bones. Fingers turned waxy, noses pale, breath rising like ghosts that didn't want to leave. Heinrich awoke to silence. No shots, no voices, only the crackle of frost biting through cloth. For a moment, he thought the front had gone quiet because the war was over. Then he saw the body beside him. It was Otto. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His hand still clutched his rifle. The frost had covered his beard in silver, his lips faintly blue. He must have frozen sometime in the night, mid-breath, mid-thought. The snow had preserved him perfectly, like a photograph the cold refused to fade. Heinrich knelt beside him. "Otto," he whispered, shaking his shoulder. The body didn't move, only crumbled slightly, stiff and fragile like glass. Heinrich pulled his own glove off, touched Otto's cheek, then flinched. It felt like touching stone. Around the trench, others began to notice. No one screamed, no one wept. They simply stared, blank, tired, as if death had become another daily routine. A medic crossed himself, though his fingers trembled too much to finish the gesture. Someone muttered, "At least he went quietly." Another replied, "At least he didn't starve first." Heinrich wanted to feel something, pity, anger, grief, but nothing came. Only the slow throb of his heart and the dry ache behind his eyes. He looked at Otto's tin, still half full of Pervitin, lying near his frozen hand. The sergeant noticed it too. He bent down, scooped it up, and held it out. He doesn't need it now. No one argued. They each took one pill, passing the tin like communion. When it reached Heinrich, he hesitated. The tablets glimmered faintly under the weak light. He thought of Otto's smile, of his joke about the letter, of the way he laughed when the snow fell the first night. Then he took one anyway. The warmth spread again, cruel, familiar, deceitful. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and whispered, "Forgive me." But he didn't know who he was speaking to, Otto, God, or the part of himself that still wanted to feel. Later, when the sergeant ordered them to move on, Heinrich helped carry the body. They dug a shallow grave at the edge of the trench, the ground so hard that the shovels bent. It wasn't deep enough. The snow would take him soon, cover him completely, make him part of the white. When they were done, Heinrich placed a single cartridge on the mound, a soldier's token. It gleamed faintly before the snow swallowed it. He stood there a long moment, the world so quiet that he could hear his own pulse echoing in his ears. There was a question in that silence. What does compassion become when it's too cold to feel it? Is mercy still mercy when it's bought with another man's ration? The wind answered with a howl, carrying flakes across the field. Heinrich turned away, his face expressionless. The pill kept him steady, kept him strong, or at least upright. Behind him, Otto disappeared beneath the snow, and the trench moved on as if he'd never been there. That night, Heinrich couldn't remember what Otto's voice sounded like. He tried once to recall it, but the pill blurred it away, smoothed every sharp edge until only silence remained. He stared up at the dark sky and thought, maybe that's how peace begins. Then he took another pill and peace was gone. The dawn that followed was born in smoke. Gray light crawled through the cracks of the trench, mixing with the stench of oil, sweat, and something sour that clung to every breath. Heinrich's body was awake before his mind was, that strange clarity that came not from rest but from chemicals humming under his skin. "Get ready," the sergeant barked. "We move at first light." No one asked where. There was nowhere left in Stalingrad, only directionless ruin. The men loaded rifles, tightened straps, swallowed pills. Heinrich did the same. The taste had become part of him now, bitter as metal, sharp as ice. Each swallow erased a little more of the man he'd been before. When they climbed over the trench, the world erupted. Bullets tore through the mist, each one a streak of invisible light. Mortars bloomed in the distance, flowers of dirt and flame. The snow caught fire where shells landed, turning red and black before settling again. Heinrich ran without thinking. His boots hit the ground in rhythm with his heartbeat. He didn't feel the cold anymore. He didn't feel anything. The pill made him weightless, precise, like a cog in an enormous machine that didn't know mercy. He fired at the shadows ahead, hearing only the click, recoil. No fear, no hesitation. Only motion. A man beside him screamed, clutching his stomach. Heinrich turned, saw the wound, dark and wide, and kept moving. The scream followed him, echoing between the ruins until it became another sound in the storm. His pulse drowned everything else. It beat like a drum, relentless, mechanical. He reached the edge of a factory, dove behind a collapsed wall. Shrapnel hissed through the air, slicing stone and flesh alike. He peeked out, saw smoke twisting up from the riverbank, the front shifting again as it always did. Nothing stayed still in this city. Not the sky, not the ground, not even the dead. He took cover behind a broken beam, breathing hard. His gloves were torn, his fingers raw, but he didn't notice until he saw the blood steaming against the cold air. He laughed softly, not from madness but from disbelief. How could a man bleed and not feel pain? He reloaded with trembling hands, not from fear. The pill didn't allow that, but from exhaustion wrapped in adrenaline. A soldier crawled beside him, panting. "They're falling back," the man said. Heinrich nodded. "Then we follow." They advanced again, deeper into the wreckage. The sky cracked with artillery, a roar so loud it made the air vibrate. Heinrich's vision blurred for a moment, not from smoke but from something inside his head. The world tilted, spun, then steadied again. He fired at a moving shape, saw it drop. Was it enemy or friend? He didn't know. He didn't ask. When the shooting stopped, he found himself standing in the open. Around him, the snow was churned with mud and blood. Bodies lay in heaps, German, Russian, it no longer mattered. He felt a strange calm, almost serenity, watching the steam rise from the ground. Fire and frost, two enemies locked in an endless dance. He sank to his knees, chest heaving, and whispered to no one, "It's beautiful, Isn't it? There was no answer. Only the crackling of flames devouring the snow. Heinrich opened his tin, but it was empty. The pill had burned through him faster than before. He closed his eyes, felt the cold rushing back into his limbs, and realized how fragile his strength truly was. Was it courage that carried him forward, or the chemical pretending to be his soul? And if courage comes from a bottle or a pill, does it still count when you die for it? The wind rose, carrying ash across the field. Heinrich watched it swirl black and white together and thought, perhaps this was the truth of war, not fire or frost, but the space in between, where men burn just enough to keep from freezing. The factory they took that morning no longer made anything. The walls were split open by shell fire, the machines half melted by bombs. But command called it a victory anyway. They said the building was strategically vital, though no one knew why. The men huddled inside, coughing smoke, pressing cold metal to colder hands, and waited for the next order that would tell them where to die. Heinrich sat against a twisted gear the size of a wagon wheel. Steam hissed somewhere in the wreckage. The air smelled of oil and blood, and every breath tasted like rust. He closed his eyes and listened to the low hum of the machines. Not working, not alive, but still whispering as if they remembered motion. For a moment he imagined them as hearts. Beating, failing, still trying. Someone handed him a piece of bread, hard as brick. He bit it anyway, each chew echoing through the silence. Then came the familiar rattle of the pill tin. Heinrich opened it, empty. He almost laughed. No warmth, no fire, no illusion. Only himself now. But what was that self without the pill? He could feel it, the fog crawling back in, the fatigue spreading through his chest like ice. He looked around at his comrades, hollow-eyed men, all blinking in slow confusion, like machines running out of fuel. Otto would have joked. Sergei would have sung. But both were gone, swallowed by the snow and the silence. Now the only sound was the dull creak of boots shifting, and the faint clink of an empty tin rolling across the floor. The sergeant entered, coat stiff with frost. "Rest while you can," he said. "Reinforcements are coming." But his voice held no conviction, and no one answered. Heinrich wondered if even he believed it. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams, what was left of them, and tried to recall his heartbeat. It used to drum loud and sure, like the factory machines in their prime. Now it felt mechanical, distant, a faint ticking rather than a pulse. What happens to a man when his heart starts beating like a machine? Is he still human, or just a soldier built from what's left of one? He reached for his coat pocket, found a scrap of paper folded tight. His letter home, unsent, stained, already fading. He unfolded it with shaking hands. The words looked like someone else had written them. Promises, lies, hope drawn in crooked lines. He read it aloud softly, barely hearing his own voice. "I'll come home soon. The snow can't last forever." He smiled bitterly. It always lasts forever. Outside, gunfire echoed again, distant but certain. Another order would come soon. Another march through smoke. Another round of fire and frost. He stuffed the letter back into his pocket and stood. The world spun for a moment. His legs ached. His vision blurred. He pressed his hand against the machine beside him. Its metal still faintly warm from some forgotten purpose. "Keep going," he whispered, unsure if he was talking to himself or to it. "Just keep going." The machine gave no answer. But in its stillness, he imagined a heartbeat. Slow, steady, inhumanly calm. He matched his breathing to it. Inhale. Exhale. Cold air in, memory out. And when the next shell hit, shaking the factory to its bones, Heinrich didn't flinch. He only whispered through the dust. "I'm already a machine." The others didn't hear him. They were too busy trying to remember how to feel. The snow fell heavier that night. Not soft and gentle, but thick, endless, a storm that buried the world. The factory roof groaned under its weight. Men slept in corners, their breath rising in pale clouds that froze before reaching the ceiling. No one spoke. Even dreams had gone silent. Heinrich sat awake, back against a frozen wall. His hands shook, not from fear, that had long since burned out, but from something deeper, colder. The absence of the pill had left a hollow inside him, a space where the heat used to live. He rubbed his chest, trying to feel his heartbeat. It was there, faint, uncertain. A weak rhythm struggling beneath layers of exhaustion. He took a deep breath and exhaled frost. The air bit at his lungs like teeth. He thought of home, of Clara's voice, soft as the lullabies she used to hum while folding sheets by the window. He could almost hear it, faint through the howl of the storm. But the memory slipped away before he could hold it. How long had it been since her face felt real? He looked around the factory. Shapes of men slumped in sleep, rifles cradled like children. Some murmured words from their dreams, names, prayers, nonsense. One man laughed suddenly, then fell quiet again. Another whispered a word Heinrich couldn't understand, maybe forgive or forget. He stared at them, realizing they all looked the same now. Uniforms, faces, even their despair blurred into one pale mass. The storm outside howled, but the real blizzard was inside, a cold spreading from the heart outward. He reached for his flask, empty. He shook it anyway, listening to the hollow clink. It reminded him of the sound Otto's frozen hand made when it fell against the ground. He winced. That memory still had weight. Maybe that meant he wasn't gone entirely. He whispered to himself, "Do you think the soul freezes too, or does it just sleep?" His breath hung in the air like a ghost waiting for an answer. He thought of the men who used to sing before dawn. How the songs once echoed through the trenches like defiance. Now no one sang. Their voices had frozen too, buried somewhere between frostbite and fatigue. Heinrich tried to hum one of the old tunes, but his throat refused. The sound cracked halfway, a broken melody swallowed by the wind outside. He pressed his forehead against the cold wall, listening to the hum of the storm. It reminded him of the sea, endless, merciless, alive. He imagined walking into it barefoot, letting it cover him, not to die but to stop shivering forever. A flicker of warmth returned, not from fire but from the thought itself. To stop fighting the cold, to let it in, to become it. What happens when a man stops fearing the cold? Does he find peace, or just forget he's dying? He closed his eyes. The snow outside howled louder, as if answering. The others stirred in their sleep. Someone muttered Heinrich's name, but he didn't respond. He just listened to the storm inside his chest, and wondered how long before it matched the one outside. The storm broke by morning, leaving the city half buried in silence. Only smoke still moved, curling lazily from the burned husks of buildings, ghosts of fire clinging to a world of ice. Heinrich woke to the weight of a rifle across his knees. Someone had placed it there while he slept. Beside him, a dark shape leaned against the wall, motionless, silent. He thought it was another frozen body until it exhaled. It was Lucas, younger than most, barely 20, maybe less. The boy's face was pale and hollow, his eyes unfocused. He clutched his own rifle like a talisman, fingers white on the grip. "Morning," Heinrich muttered. Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he held out a small tin, not the usual pillbox, but a battered candy tin, edges worn smooth from years of handling. "Found it," he said softly. Inside were 2 pills, chipped in gray. "Otto's stash," Lucas added, his voice trembling. "I thought we should share." Heinrich hesitated. The sight of the pills made his stomach twist with both craving and shame. He looked at Lucas. The boy's lips were cracked, his eyes hollow. He'd seen that look before. It wasn't hunger. It was withdrawal. They split the pills in silence. The bitterness hit first, then the heat, spreading like fire through their veins. The factory seemed to sharpen. Every sound, every flicker of light came alive again. Lucas smiled faintly for the first time in days. "Feels like waking up," he whispered. Heinrich nodded, though something in him recoiled. Waking up. It felt more like trading one dream for another. They stepped outside together. The world was still white, still dead. But through the ruins, figures moved, comrades scavenging, searching for anything that could be burned, eaten, swallowed, believed. Lucas pointed toward the river. "Command says we're to cross again." Heinrich's stomach tightened. The river. He remembered that black water. The last crossing where half the company froze before reaching the other side. He hadn't realized until now how much of that night he'd forgotten, or how much he'd chosen to forget. They walked through the wreckage side by side. The pills made Lucas talkative, too much so. He spoke of his home in Dresden, of his sister, of the bakery his father owned. His words spilled out in fragments, stories half dreamed, half remembered. Heinrich listened, though each story hurt. Each one was a reminder of what no longer existed. At one point, Lucas laughed, an actual laugh. It startled Heinrich. The sound felt alive, fragile, human. Then a shell landed somewhere near the river, and the laughter died instantly. They ducked behind a frozen car. The ground trembled, snow falling from shattered windows like ash. Lucas clutched his rifle tighter. "I'm not scared," he whispered. Heinrich looked at him, the boy's hands shaking, pupils wide. "Everyone's scared," Heinrich said. "That's what the pills are for." The boy nodded, eyes downcast. Then quietly asked, "Do you think, if we stop taking them, we stop being brave?" Heinrich didn't answer, because the truth was too cruel. He wasn't sure they'd be anything without them. Not brave, not alive, not even men. As the shelling slowed, they stood again. The river shimmered ahead, black ice, silver fog. Their breath rose like steam as they stared at it. Lucas exhaled. "Looks like it's waiting for us." Heinrich nodded. "Yes, it always is." They walked toward the river together, two shadows against the snow, each following the other, though neither knew who was leading. What's more dangerous, the enemy ahead, or the hunger behind your own ribs? When does a comrade become a reflection, and when does that reflection fade? By the time they reached the water's edge, Lucas was humming softly, the tune from some distant home. Heinrich didn't recognize it, but he let it play. It was the only warmth left between them. The river was not frozen solid, not yet. It shone like glass over a heartbeat of black water beneath. Each gust of wind sent cracks whispering through the surface, as if the ice itself were warning them to turn back. But there was no turning back. Orders had been given, cross before dawn. Behind them lay the ruins, the cold, and starvation. Ahead the same, but with purpose. Heinrich tightened the strap on his rifle, then looked to Lucas, who stood beside him, pale-faced and trembling, his breath fogging in nervous bursts. The boy smiled weakly. "Feels thinner than last time." "It always does," Heinrich muttered. A rope had been stretched across the narrowest point, their lifeline, their guide. Men went one by one, boots sliding, rifles clattering, breath short. The sound of cracking ice followed every step. Heinrich waited until it was their turn. The cold bit through his gloves as he gripped the rope. Each movement forward felt like crawling across glass. The air was sharp, filled with the sound of shuffling boots, and the occasional splash when someone slipped and vanished below. No one stopped to look. Halfway across, Lucas froze. His boot had punched through the ice, and black water surged around his leg. He gasped, not from pain but from shock. "Don't move," Heinrich hissed. He dropped to his knees, reaching out. The rope shook in his hands. He could feel the river pulling. The boy's eyes were wide, wild. "It's cold, God, it's so cold." Heinrich grabbed his sleeve, yanking with all his strength. The ice beneath him screamed but held. With one final pull, Lucas slid free, collapsing against the surface, gasping, shivering violently. They lay there for a moment, two bodies sprawled on the frozen skin of the world, listening to their own breath echo in the dark. Then, slowly, they crawled forward again. When they reached the far bank, Lucas fell to his knees, coughing water and steam. Heinrich dropped beside him, panting, his hands numb, his heart slamming in his chest. "Don't stop," Heinrich urged. "You'll freeze." But Lucas didn't answer. His body shook uncontrollably. The wet cloth was already stiffening with frost. Heinrich ripped open his pack, pulled out the last dry scrap of cloth he had, a torn flag, and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. The irony didn't escape him. A nation's symbol now serving as a blanket for a dying soldier. He rubbed Lucas's arms, but the boy's trembling slowed, then stopped. His eyes rolled back, his lips parted. Heinrich slapped his face lightly. "Lucas, stay with me." Nothing, only the faintest breath, curling from his mouth like smoke. Heinrich reached for his coat pocket. The pill tin. Still one left. He hesitated only a second, then pressed it against the boy's lips. "Swallow," he whispered. "It'll warm you." Lucas obeyed barely. Minutes passed. Then color returned to his cheeks, and his eyes flickered open. Heinrich exhaled, shoulders trembling with relief. The boy smiled faintly. "I thought I saw home," he murmured. Heinrich nodded. "Not yet. You'll see it for real." The boy didn't answer, already slipping back into half-sleep. Heinrich looked up at the sky. Dark clouds crawling like smoke across the horizon. He thought of all the men swallowed by that same black river, their names already dissolving beneath the ice. He whispered, "Maybe the river doesn't take the dead. Maybe it just remembers them." When a man survives the cold, what part of him does not return? And when he saves another, is it mercy or a refusal to be alone? Heinrich leaned back, feeling the ice-hard ground beneath him, and let his breath fade into the frozen dawn. By midday, the snow had turned gray. It fell slow, heavy, the kind that didn't feel like snow at all, but like ash pretending to be pure. Every flake carried soot from burned buildings, falling softly over helmets and corpses alike. Heinrich and Lucas followed the others through the outskirts of the ruined city. The streets were unrecognizable, a labyrinth of walls without roofs, windows without glass, homes without warmth. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from craters where houses used to stand. The sound of boots crunching over shattered brick was the only rhythm left. Command had set up headquarters inside a collapsed church. The steeple was gone, the stained glass blown into dust. Inside, officers huddled around maps spread over the altar. Candles flickered beside bullet holes, and where prayers had once been whispered, orders were barked instead. New offensive. Tomorrow, one officer said. Across the square. Into the industrial quarter. The words echoed like iron. Men shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Heinrich said nothing. He already knew what tomorrow meant. Another march into smoke. Another river of fire. He turned his gaze toward the broken crucifix still hanging behind the altar. The Christ figure was cracked, half buried in dust. One arm missing, the other reaching down as if trying to lift the fallen. Lucas stood beside him, eyes wide. "Do you think he watches us?" he whispered. Heinrich didn't answer. If he did, he was silent. Outside, the snow kept falling, so thick that it blurred the edges of everything. You couldn't tell rubble from ground, soldier from shadow. It was as if the world had decided to erase itself, flake by flake. Heinrich sat by a wall, cleaning his rifle with numb hands. He watched Lucas trying to start a small fire with splinters from a pew. The boy's face looked older already, his cheeks hollow, his eyes dim but still searching for something to believe in. The flame caught, weak and blue. They huddled close, soaking what little warmth it offered. Lucas pulled something from his pocket, the candy tin now empty. He turned it over in his palm. "That was the last one," he murmured. Heinrich nodded. "Then we fight sober." The words tasted strange, like saying goodbye to a part of themselves they hadn't chosen to lose. The air between them felt heavier without the promise of that chemical fire. The sergeant passed by, glancing down. "Rest while you can," he muttered. "Tomorrow's supposed to be glorious." Heinrich almost laughed. Glorious. He wondered if the man even remembered what that word meant. Later that night, the sky burned orange from distant fires. Heinrich sat alone near the shattered altar, watching flakes of ash drift down like snow inside the ruined church. He whispered quietly to no one, "If there's glory in this, may God choke on it." The silence swallowed his words whole. The wind through the broken walls sounded like a choir gone mad. He closed his eyes, feeling warmth from the dying fire flicker across his face. How many prayers does a battlefield bury before one is answered? And if faith survives war, is it faith or simply habit? Heinrich tilted his head back, watching a single snowflake melt against the blackened ceiling beam. It slid down like a tear. He didn't know whether to call it mercy or mourning. At dawn, the church bells rang, though no one had pulled the rope. The sound came from the wind itself, whistling through the shattered tower. It was hollow, haunting, like the city's last voice calling from its ruins. The men gathered in the square, silent as ghosts. Their uniforms hung loose from hunger, their rifles slick with frost. Smoke drifted from every direction. Gray, curling, endless, blurring the line between ground and sky. Somewhere beneath that haze lay their target, the industrial quarter. Lucas stood beside Heinrich, trembling but trying to hide it. He'd wrapped the torn flag tighter around his shoulders, as if it could still mean something. He whispered, "Do you think they'll remember this?" Heinrich didn't look at him. No one remembers smoke. The sergeant walked the line, eyes red from exhaustion. He carried no map, no compass, only the day's order, advance. When he spoke, it was more to the wind than to them. "Keep moving. Don't think. Don't stop." The first shells landed before they even stepped forward. The air turned into fire. Chunks of ice and stone rained from the rooftops, and the square vanished in a storm of dust and shrapnel. Heinrich dropped low, pulling Lucas down with him. They crawled through rubble, the ground trembling like a beast waking beneath their feet. When the smoke cleared, the statue at the center of the square was gone. Only a leg remained, jutting from the ground like a warning. They ran. Through doorways that no longer had walls, past craters that hissed steam like open mouths. Heinrich fired at shadows, shapes that flickered in and out of view. The noise was so constant that silence no longer existed. At one point, Lucas stumbled, his boot catching on a broken beam. He fell, screaming as his leg twisted beneath him. Heinrich spun back, dragged him behind cover, his heart hammering against the roar. Blood seeped into the snow, a dark, spreading bloom. Lucas tried to stand, failed, gasped. "I can still fight." "No," Heinrich said sharply. "You crawl, I cover." The boy's lips trembled. "But the order. The order's ash." Heinrich fired again. Each shot an act of stubborn survival rather than strategy. Smoke rolled through the streets, thick and heavy enough to choke on. He felt it fill his lungs, his eyes, his thoughts. The sergeant's whistle cut through the noise. Retreat. Heinrich didn't hear it at first. He just saw men running, their faces smudged with soot, their mouths open in voiceless panic. He grabbed Lucas under the arms, pulling him backward. The boy whimpered but didn't resist. The square behind them was gone now, swallowed whole by smoke and flame. The world had turned to shadow. When they reached the edge of a collapsed tram car, Heinrich dropped beside it, panting, coughing black dust. He looked back toward the square. Nothing but a sea of shifting gray. Lucas shivered violently. His eyes were wide, unfocused. Heinrich pressed a hand to the boy's chest. The heartbeat was there, faint but steady. For a long moment they sat in silence, watching flakes of ash drift down like snow. Heinrich whispered, "Smoke looks peaceful when you stop breathing it. What does a man become when every victory feels like burning? How many ghosts can one city hold before it chokes on them all?" Somewhere in the distance, a bell clanged again, a sound too lonely to be divine. Heinrich leaned back against the tram, closed his eyes, and let the city breathe for him. By nightfall, the snow began again, soft this time, gentle, as if trying to cover the city's wounds with silence. The fire from the square still burned somewhere behind them, but the wind carried its light away in flickers. Only the faint orange glow lingered on the horizon, like a dying memory refusing to fade. Heinrich sat against a collapsed tram car, Lucas lying beside him, half conscious, his leg bandaged with strips of torn cloth. The boy's skin was pale, his breath uneven, but his fingers still clutched the small flag around his shoulders. It was filthy now, burned at the edges, its colors lost beneath soot and frost. Heinrich reached over, touching the fabric lightly. "You should rest," he murmured. Lucas opened his eyes, dull blue rimmed red. He smiled faintly. "It's not a flag anymore. It's a reminder." "Of what?" Heinrich asked. Lucas hesitated. "Of who we were before all this." The older man stared at him for a long moment, then looked away, his jaw tightening. He didn't want to admit that he'd forgotten what before even looked like. The memory of sunlight, of laughter, of bread that wasn't hard as stone. All of it felt like something he'd read once, not lived. From somewhere down the street came the soft rumble of engines. Soviet tanks, maybe, or trucks scavenging the ruins. The men tensed, clutching their rifles. But the sound faded again, swallowed by the snow. Heinrich leaned his head back against the tram, watching flakes settle on his sleeves. For a moment he pretended they were falling stars. He made a wish, though he no longer believed in them. It wasn't for victory or survival or even peace. It was simply for quiet, the kind that didn't need pills, orders, or lies to sustain it. Beside him, Lucas whispered, "I used to carry this flag in parades back home. We thought it meant strength." Heinrich smiled bitterly. "And now?" The boy shrugged weakly. "Now it means warmth." The fire from the square flickered again, a dull pulse against the snow. Heinrich thought of the church, the altar, the crucifix half buried in ash. He thought of faith, how it once united men, and how it now lay in ruins beside everything else. He tore a strip from his own sleeve and tied it over the boy's bandage, tightening it carefully. Lucas hissed in pain but nodded in gratitude. Heinrich's hands lingered for a moment, They were shaking not from cold but from exhaustion, the kind that seeps into bone and never leaves. He looked again at the ragged flag. It fluttered faintly in the wind, no longer waving for victory, but trembling like a dying flame. He wondered how many men had died for cloth like that. How many believed it would outlast them? What does loyalty mean when the thing you serve can no longer protect you? And if a flag no longer stands for hope, what keeps a soldier standing at all? Heinrich reached out, pulled the flag up, and tucked it tighter around Lucas's shoulders. There, he whispered. Now it's not for the army. It's for you. The boy smiled, eyes fluttering closed. Then I'll fight for that. Heinrich didn't reply. He just stared at the ruined skyline. Towers broken, fires fading, snow falling thicker now, and realized that maybe that was all there was left to fight for. Not nations, not glory, but the small, fragile warmth between two people refusing to vanish. Morning came without color. No sunrise, no warmth, only a gray sky stretching endlessly over a city of ruins. The fires had burned out during the night, leaving behind streets lined with smoke and silence. The men moved in single file through the haze, a column of ghosts passing through what once was civilization. Every step crunched on frozen glass and bone. Their breath rose together in faint clouds, a rhythm that sounded almost like marching music, slow, solemn, broken. Heinrich walked near the front, rifle slung over his shoulder, his boots heavy with frozen mud. Lucas hobbled beside him, leaning on a stick fashioned from a broken rifle. He refused to fall behind. Heinrich didn't stop him. Pride was all the boy had left. The order was simple: relocate, regroup, reinforce. Words that had lost all meaning long ago. Every direction led only to more ruin. Every command felt like repetition of the last. War had become circular, a parade that went nowhere. They passed what used to be a boulevard. Storefronts shattered, lampposts bent, statues toppled. On one wall, half covered in ash, a propaganda poster still clung. A soldier smiling, hand raised in triumph. Beneath the soot, the slogan read, "March toward victory." Lucas stared at it, then laughed softly. It was a small, cracked sound, too brittle to be joy. Heinrich glanced at him. "What's funny?" The boy shrugged. "We're still marching." For a moment, Heinrich almost smiled. Then he looked around at the others. Faces hollow, eyes blank, movements mechanical, and realized the truth. They were still marching, but not toward victory, just forward, because stopping meant dying. They crossed into the city's central avenue, where wind carried snow like confetti, dancing between ruins as if mocking the silence below. The sound of their boots echoed off empty buildings, and for an instant Heinrich imagined a real parade. Crowds cheering, flags waving, brass bands filling the air. Then the wind shifted and the illusion broke. Only crows remained, perched along the rooftops, their black feathers gleaming like medals for the dead. The sergeant called for a halt. The men stopped instinctively, each exhale puffing into the still air like smoke signals. Heinrich scanned the horizon. Nothing moved but the snow. The silence was complete, unnerving. And then faintly came a sound. Footsteps. Not theirs, heavier, slower, coming from beyond the fog. Every rifle lifted at once. Heinrich squinted, finger on the trigger. From the mist emerged another column. Men in ragged Soviet uniforms, equally frozen, equally broken. Their faces mirrored his own. Tired, hollow, too human for enemies. No one fired. For a long moment, both sides just stared at each other, separated by a few yards and 1,000 reasons. The wind carried the faint jingle of dog tags. One of the Russians raised a hand, not in surrender, not in threat, but as if to say, we're still alive too. No orders came. No gunfire followed. Just that strange, suspended moment. Two parades of ghosts meeting in the fog. Heinrich lowered his rifle first. The others followed. The Russians did the same. Then, as quietly as they'd appeared, they turned and vanished into the smoke again. Lucas whispered, "What was that?" Heinrich's voice was hoarse. "A reflection. When war lasts too long, do enemies begin to look like mirrors? And if both sides are marching through the same snow, who will ever know which was the victor?" The sergeant gave a short nod. "Keep moving." And so they did. A silent parade of men marching through ash, toward nothing, away from everything. By afternoon, the wind carried the smell of something bitter. Not smoke this time, but rot. It drifted from the east side of the city, where burned-out houses still stood like broken teeth. The men didn't speak of it. They just pulled scarves higher and kept walking. When they reached what had once been a market square, the air was heavy, unmoving. A few bodies lay frozen near the stalls, still in postures of waiting. A hand outstretched toward a loaf that had never been baked. Lucas stopped, staring. "They were civilians," he whispered. Heinrich nodded. "Everyone is before someone gives them a gun." They began to search the ruins for food. It wasn't looting anymore. It was survival. The market was half collapsed. Snow drifting through holes in the roof, covering everything in a thin, deceptive purity. Heinrich pried open a crate and found only dust and mouse droppings. Another man lifted a barrel lid and gagged. Inside were what used to be pickles, now black sludge. Lucas found a small bakery at the corner. Its windows shattered, the air thick with the scent of old smoke and flour. Inside, shelves were empty, but behind the counter lay a mound of dark shapes under canvas. He hesitated. Then he pulled the cloth back. It wasn't bread. It was what was left of the bakers. Their aprons stiff with frost, hands still clutching wooden paddles. One man had fallen near the oven door, as if he'd tried to reach inside even after the fire had gone cold. Lucas stumbled backward, hand over his mouth. Heinrich entered, saw the scene, and froze. For a moment, no words came, only the echo of the past. The smell of yeast and warmth that no longer existed. "Close it," Heinrich said quietly. Lucas obeyed, lowering the canvas with trembling hands. They stood there in silence. Then Lucas noticed something. A small loaf, blackened but intact, resting on a tray near the oven. He picked it up carefully, brushing ash away. "It's real," he said, voice shaking with disbelief. Heinrich stared. "It's poison. Or it's food," Lucas whispered. He broke the loaf in half. Steam rose faintly from the center. Not heat, but the illusion of it. He offered Heinrich one piece. The older man hesitated, then took it. They ate in silence, sitting among the dead bakers. The bread was bitter, burned, the taste of soot and smoke thick on the tongue. But it was something to chew, something that felt alive. When Lucas swallowed, his eyes filled with tears. Heinrich didn't ask why. He chewed slowly, staring at the cracked ceiling. "This city feeds us its dead now," he muttered. Lucas looked up. "What do you mean?" Heinrich wiped crumbs from his gloves. "Everything we eat, everything we drink, everything that keeps us standing, it's all stolen from something that used to live." The boy fell quiet. Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the empty stalls like old bones. When they finally left, Lucas placed half of the remaining loaf on the counter beside the covered bodies. "For them," he whispered. Heinrich didn't stop him. He only glanced back once before stepping into the snow. When hunger and mercy share the same bite, which one keeps you human? And when the dead feed the living, do they forgive us, or curse us to remember? The loaf froze solid within minutes, but Heinrich swore he could still smell it long after they left the square. That faint, ghostly aroma of bread, rising in a city where nothing else ever would again. That night, the snow fell in silence so deep it felt holy. The kind of silence that didn't heal, only buried. The column had stopped near the edge of the industrial quarter, where broken chimneys stood like gravestones against the sky. They built a fire from splintered doors and chair legs scavenged from a school. The wood hissed and cracked, smoke twisting into the gray night. Heinrich sat nearest the flames, his hands open to the heat. His gloves were gone now, traded for bandages and food days earlier. The skin on his palms was split and raw, but when he turned them toward the fire, he almost imagined they were whole again. Lucas sat beside him, his face glowing faintly orange. The boy had stopped shivering. That was what frightened Heinrich most. "You're quiet," he said. Lucas stared into the flames. "I keep thinking about the bakers," he murmured. "They stayed with their ovens until the end." Heinrich nodded. Maybe they thought the fire would outlast them. Around the fire, the others murmured softly. Small conversations that drifted like ash. Someone whispered a prayer in Polish. Another man laughed at nothing. The sergeant sat apart, polishing a rusted pistol as if it were a relic. The fire was weak, but the men leaned closer anyway. Each ember seemed to hold a memory. Of home, of warmth, of something worth returning to. Heinrich watched their faces. Eyes wide, hollow, reflecting the glow like mirrors for ghosts. Lucas broke the silence. What if the fire doesn't die tonight? Heinrich smiled faintly. Then we won't either. The boy's eyes glimmered, uncertain whether to believe him. Do you think, Lucas asked quietly, that light remembers who it's burned for? The question struck Heinrich harder than the wind. He looked into the flames, saw faces flickering in their rise and fall. Otto, Sergei, the nameless men swallowed by smoke. Maybe light did remember. Maybe it carried their shapes, burning a little longer in defiance of the dark. He tossed another plank onto the fire, caught slowly, then roared to life. A burst of color in a world that had forgotten color. For a moment they all sat in silence, their eyes drawn to the flame like moths that no longer feared burning. Heinrich closed his eyes, letting the warmth touch his face, imagining the sun, not the harsh light of bombs, but the gentle kind that once streamed through kitchen windows. But warmth was dangerous now. It softened the will, blurred the edges of survival. He knew it but didn't care. For tonight they were men again, not soldiers, not ghosts. How long can a flame pretend to be life before it too becomes memory? And when the cold comes again, will it find you ready or already gone? The fire began to fade. The men huddled closer, desperate to catch the last scraps of heat. Heinrich tore a page from his old letter, the one he'd never sent, and fed it to the flames. The paper curled, blackened, and for one brief instant, his words glowed gold before turning to ash. Lucas saw it. What did it say? He asked. Heinrich watched the ember rise, drifting into the dark. It said I'd come home. The boy's mouth parted, but no words came. They sat in silence until the fire was no more. Only smoke, only breath. And when the last ember died, the wind carried its warmth away, like a soul that had finally stopped pretending to burn. By morning, the fire was gone, and the city sounded like an empty machine. Every gust of wind rattled something. A pipe, a piece of tin, a loose shutter. And each sound echoed across the ruins like metal ghosts whispering to one another. The men stirred slowly, reluctant to rise. Their uniforms were stiff with frost, their breath pale against the lifeless gray. Heinrich woke to the clang of distant steel, a rhythm too deliberate to be the wind. He sat up, scanning the horizon. Through the smoke he saw movement, figures in the distance dragging sheets of scrap, hollow shapes wrapped in blankets that shimmered like aluminum. Civilians maybe, or what was left of them. They scavenged in silence, bending and straightening like the city's broken gears. Lucas followed his gaze. They look like machines, he whispered. Heinrich nodded. We all do. The sergeant barked an order, time to move again. They followed a path lined with rusted rails, past train cars half buried in snow. Some still held cargo. Metal twisted into strange, unrecognizable forms. A melted bicycle, the frame of a child's bed. Things that once belonged to lives with names. As they passed, Heinrich brushed his fingers along the side of one car. It was warm. He stopped, confused. The others noticed it too. Heat pulsing faintly beneath the steel, as though something inside still breathed. The sergeant pried the door open. Steam rolled out, thick and black. Inside, the remnants of a burned transport, charred crates, bones fused to rails, and scattered among them, twisted sheets of tin. Lucas covered his mouth. What happened here? Heinrich answered softly, someone mistook people for cargo. They stood in silence. The wind howled through the car's hollow frame, making it sing like a metallic organ. It was almost music, awful, beautiful, endless. Lucas stepped closer, his reflection flickering in the scorched metal. Listen, he said. It's like it's still alive. Heinrich didn't respond. He knew that sound too well. It was the same hum that lived in his own chest, the one that replaced his heartbeat long ago. He tapped the wall lightly with his knuckles. The echo came back delayed, faint, as though the city itself were answering from somewhere far beneath the ground. He wondered, not for the first time, if the war had built something larger than all of them. A machine that needed neither purpose nor rest. Just the endless rhythm of men feeding it metal, flesh, and fire. When war becomes a machine, does it ever stop turning? And when you walk inside its echo, can you still hear your own pulse? He looked down at his hands, raw, cracked, almost mechanical in their precision. Lucas stood beside him, silent now, staring at the same warped reflection. For a brief moment, Heinrich imagined they weren't men at all, just cogs in a dying world. turning until rust took them too. The sergeant ordered them onward. Heinrich obeyed without thought, the sound of metal still ringing in his ears. Behind them, the wind howled through the train car again, and the echo followed like a song that refused to die. By midday, the wind carried a sound that didn't belong. A deep, resonant hum rolling across the snow. At first, Heinrich thought it was artillery, but it was slower, softer. A single, drawn-out toll echoing through the ruins. A bell. The men stopped, lifting their heads. None of them had heard a bell in months. Churches had long since collapsed. Their towers shattered, their bells buried under rubble. Yet here it was again, faint, cracked, but real. Each toll seemed to come from somewhere far away, as though the sound itself was wandering the city, searching for someone left to hear it. The sergeant frowned. "We move toward it," he ordered, and so they did, their boots crunching in rhythm with the bell's ghostly pulse. They passed through a courtyard littered with frozen washing lines, shirts and bedsheets stiff as boards, fluttering like flags of surrender in the wind. The air grew sharper, the sky dimming to the color of pewter. Then they saw it. A church half buried under a mound of snow and debris, its steeple broken, its single remaining bell swinging weakly in the wind. The rope was long gone, but a piece of steel pipe dangled from it, striking the rim with every gust. Lucas whispered, "It's still ringing." Heinrich nodded slowly. The wind's doing what the faithful can't. They approached cautiously. The front doors were gone, replaced by a drift of snow. Inside, the pews were overturned, candles melted into puddles of wax. And beneath the altar, a sight that made them all fall silent. A group of civilians lay huddled together, frozen where they had gathered for warmth. Children, mothers, an old man clutching a rosary that had fused into the flesh of his palm. The bell tolled again, and the sound trembled through the walls like a heartbeat. Heinrich removed his cap. No one ordered him to. Just felt right. Lucas knelt, brushing snow from one of the children's faces. His lips moved, but no words came. After a moment, he whispered, "They waited for a miracle." Heinrich glanced toward the bell. "It came," he said softly, "just too late." The others stood still, some crossing themselves, others simply staring, their faces unreadable behind frost and fatigue. The bell rang once more, a slow, mournful sound, and something inside Heinrich stirred. Not pity, not sorrow, something heavier, recognition. This was the future they were marching toward, a world where prayers froze before reaching heaven, and bells rang for no one. He turned to Lucas. "Take their blanket," he said quietly. "They don't need it now." The boy hesitated. "It feels wrong." "It all feels wrong," Heinrich replied. "That's how we know we're still human." They covered the bodies again, pulled the blanket tight, and left without another word. As they stepped outside, the wind caught the bell once more, its tone softer now, fading into the distance. Heinrich paused, watching the tower sway against the pale sky. He whispered, "Even broken bells remember how to mourn. When faith freezes, does it die, or does it wait? And if no one listens, does the prayer still echo somewhere in the cold?" The sound followed them long after they left the church, a fragile hum clinging to the edges of silence, a reminder that even the dead could still make the world tremble. By dusk, the wind changed again, colder, sharper, the kind that cut through wool and skin and bone as if none of it mattered. Snow drifted across the road ahead, burying tire tracks and footprints as quickly as they were made. The column stopped at the edge of a ravine. Once there had been a bridge here, a proud steel span stretching across the frozen river below. Now it lay in twisted ruins, the metal ribs jutting out from the cliffs like the skeleton of some giant beast. They couldn't go back. The way behind was already lost to the snow. The sergeant pointed forward. "We cross," he said simply. Heinrich stared into the chasm. The drop was steep, the river below black and moving, its surface half frozen and half alive. The old supports still reached across the gap, a mess of beams, ropes, and debris, just enough to tempt a desperate man into trying. Lucas swallowed hard. "It won't hold," he said. Heinrich met his gaze. "It has to." The first man went out crawling on his belly, clutching the rope line, testing each plank with his rifle butt. It groaned under his weight but didn't give. One by one they followed. Every movement made the structure shiver, every step a question the bridge might refuse to answer. When Heinrich's turn came, he slung his rifle over his shoulder and stepped forward. The wind hit him full in the face, a living thing cold and angry. The boards beneath him flexed and screamed. He could feel the vibration of every heartbeat, his own mixed with the bridge's dying pulse. Halfway across he heard a crack. Someone behind shouted, a curse, a warning, then the sound of wood splintering. He turned just in time to see one of the men fall through, his body vanishing into the dark below without a sound. For a moment no one moved. Then Lucas called out, his voice raw, keep going, don't look down. Heinrich wanted to believe the boy's words, but when he glanced at Lucas, still on the far edge, gripping the rope with shaking hands, he saw terror and courage braided together like rope fibers stretched to breaking. Heinrich moved faster, each step a whisper between life and gravity. He didn't pray, not because he'd stopped believing, but because he didn't know which God ruled over men who built bridges out of bones and hope. When he reached the far side, his knees gave out. Lucas grabbed his arm, pulling him up, and they both sat in the snow, gasping. Behind them, the sergeant guided the rest. One man slipped, another froze mid-step, but somehow they made it. When the last boot hit solid ground, the bridge gave one final groan and collapsed. The sound rolled through the ravine, echoing off the cliffs like thunder made of grief. Lucas stared at the black void where it had been. He whispered, it's gone. Heinrich nodded. So is the way back. They stood there for a while, watching the last splinters sink into the river. The current carried them away, each piece twisting and glinting like bone under the moonlight. When survival burns every bridge behind you, does the road ahead still lead anywhere? Or are you only walking because stopping means falling? Heinrich reached into his coat, pulling out a small piece of the bridge that had splintered into his sleeve. He turned it over in his fingers, a fragment of wood pale as ivory. He pocketed it without thinking. Let's move, the sergeant said. The men obeyed. As they walked, Heinrich glanced back one last time. Snow was already covering the edge, erasing all trace that a bridge, or men, had ever been there at all. They marched through the night because stopping meant freezing. No moon, no stars, only the faint glow of a dying horizon. A bruise of light where the city once burned. Boots sank into snow that never ended. A white desert swallowing every step, every sound, every memory. No one spoke anymore. Speech wasted breath, and breath was survival. Each man stared straight ahead. Eyes glazed, faces blank. A slow procession of shadows moving through an endless mirror of frost. Lucas limped, dragging one leg behind. The stick he used as a crutch creaked with each step. Heinrich walked beside him, one hand on the boy's shoulder, guiding him through the dark. Neither dared to admit they were lost. Time had lost shape. Hours blurred into minutes, minutes into eternity. The cold made thought sluggish, and the exhaustion carved strange dreams behind their eyes. Once, Heinrich thought he saw street lamps ahead, glowing faintly through the snow. But when he blinked, they vanished. Do you hear that? Lucas murmured. Heinrich listened. At first, nothing. Then a faint rhythm, distant but steady. Not wind, not gunfire. Footsteps. He turned, scanning the white void behind them. Through the fog came faint silhouettes. Men walking just as they were, heads bowed, rifles slung. But there was something wrong about their movement. Too smooth, too silent. No sound of breath, no crunch of boots. Lucas froze. Who are they? Heinrich didn't answer. He simply said, keep walking. Because if he looked too long, he feared he'd recognize the faces. They marched faster. The shapes behind them did not. They neither approached nor fell away, just followed. A second column of ghosts pacing them step for step. The sergeant glanced back once, his face pale as salt. He muttered something under his breath, a prayer or a curse, then ordered, eyes forward. Heinrich obeyed, but curiosity gnawed at him. Who were they? Men from another unit? The ones who didn't make it across the bridge? Or were they simply echoes, reflections walking the same road from a different time? Snow thickened, swirling in wild circles. The world became motion without direction. Up, down, sky, ground, all the same color. Heinrich's boots felt heavier with each step. His breath rasped. His vision flickered. Lucas stumbled beside him. Can we stop? Just for a minute. Heinrich shook his head. If you sleep, you won't wake. The boy didn't answer, only nodded weakly. They kept moving. Somewhere ahead, the sergeant shouted, his voice muffled by the storm. He pointed forward. A faint glow, distant but real. A fire. The column lurched toward it like starving animals. The warmth grew visible, not just imagined. Heinrich could smell it now, smoke, wood, heat. And beneath it, something else. Something sweet. When they reached the source, they found an overturned truck burning in the snow. Its cargo spilled, crates of sugar torn and melted, turning to syrup in the flames. The men crowded around it, hands outstretched. Heinrich pulled Lucas close, letting the heat touch their faces. For a moment, the cold lifted. For a moment, it felt like life. But behind them, through the swirling snow, the shadows had stopped. They stood just beyond the firelight, faces invisible, motionless. Lucas saw them too. Are they waiting? He whispered. Heinrich stared into the darkness. I think they're resting. What follows a man longer, the living beside him or the dead behind him? And when both march together, how does he know which one he's become? The wind howled again. And when Heinrich looked back once more, the shadows were gone. Only footprints remained, leading nowhere, ending in snow. By morning, the storm had passed. But the silence it left behind was worse than the wind. No birds, no shells, no engines. Only the faint crack of ice shifting under its own weight. The men were thinner now. Half of them limped. The rest walked in slow, deliberate rhythm. Their faces so pale they could have been carved from the snow itself. The last of the rations had been eaten 2 days ago. Now the column survived on snow. Handfuls of it scooped from the ground, melted on their tongues like communion from a merciless god. Heinrich watched them. Their lips cracked, their eyes hollow. He knew the danger. Eat too much snow and the cold would claim you faster. But hunger didn't care about danger. It made animals of men. Lucas stumbled beside him. Cheeks flushed from fever, eyes glassy. He scooped another handful of snow, shoved it into his mouth. Heinrich grabbed his wrist. Enough, he said sharply. Lucas glared weakly. It's all there is. I know, Heinrich replied. That's why we share it. He broke a chunk in half, gave the boy one piece and kept the other. They sucked in silence, the ice biting their tongues, the taste faintly of ash and metal. Ahead, the sergeant's voice cracked through the air. There's a supply point near the rail line, he said. His voice shook, not from conviction but from desperation. He had to believe it existed, or there was no reason to keep walking. The men followed without protest. Belief, even false, was fuel enough. Hours passed. The world blurred into white on white, sky melting into snow, horizon dissolving into imagination. Some men started talking to people who weren't there. One whispered to the sky, another to the ground, and one sang softly, his voice so broken it was impossible to tell the melody. Lucas began to drift as well. He mumbled Clara's name, Heinrich's wife, then blinked in confusion as if unsure whose memory he'd borrowed. Heinrich didn't correct him. He only said, she'd tell you to keep walking. The boy smiled faintly. Then I will. By midday the snow changed. It wasn't white anymore. Pink streaks spread across the drifts, blood frozen in thin ribbons, traces of a skirmish days or weeks before. The men slowed, their boots crunching over shell casings buried in frost. They found bodies half buried. Germans, Russians, both. The dead lay side by side, arms reaching as if for the same invisible warmth. Lucas knelt beside one, brushing snow from its face. The skin cracked open like porcelain. He whispered, they look peaceful. Heinrich stared. That's just another trick of the cold. One of the men shouted from up ahead. He'd found a supply crate frozen solid into the ground. They crowded around, pried it open with bayonets, only to find it filled with ice. The food long gone, the water frozen into useless weight. The sergeant cursed. No one replied. Instead, one soldier scooped a chunk from the crate and ate it anyway. Then another, and another. Soon they were all kneeling, chewing the ice that had entombed their salvation. Heinrich stared at them. Grown men gnawing at frozen water, their eyes glazed, their lips bleeding. He realized then what they had become. Not soldiers, not survivors, just snow eaters. Mouths full of frost, hearts too numb to beat faster. He looked at Lucas. The boy was smiling faintly again, ice clinging to his lashes like glass tears. He whispered, "It's sweet." Heinrich didn't have the heart to tell him it was salt, the taste of the dead frozen into the snow. When survival turns to hunger and hunger to madness, which one feels more human? And when snow becomes food, what does the soul feed on? Heinrich took one last handful, pressed it to his lips, and swallowed. It burned like fire, then faded like prayer. The march continued, slow, endless, each man leaving behind a trail of blood-stained footprints that the snow swallowed without hesitation. By the next evening, the snow hardened beneath their boots. It no longer crunched, it cracked, sharp and brittle, as if they were walking on the surface of something fragile and hollow. The air had turned clear, cruelly so. Every breath was a blade, every heartbeat a warning. The horizon shimmered with something strange, a faint light that wasn't fire, wasn't dawn, wasn't anything that belonged to the living. At first, Heinrich thought it was ice glinting in the moonlight, but when they drew closer, he saw it wasn't ice at all. It was glass. The ground ahead had melted and refrozen into a perfect sheet, the aftermath of a bombing, where heat so fierce had turned snow, mud, and bodies into one fused plane of translucent frost. Shapes were trapped beneath the surface, helmets, rifles, bones, a whole battle frozen mid-scream. Lucas stepped forward first. The glass groaned beneath his boot, a low, trembling sound, like the earth remembering pain. He looked down and saw his reflection overlap with a skull staring back from beneath the ice. He jerked back, gasping, "They're under us." Heinrich nodded. "Keep walking. Don't look down." But how could they not look? Every step revealed another fragment of what the fire had left behind. A hand clutching a metal, a boot still laced tight, a face preserved in perfect terror. Even the snow dared not cover this place. It glittered too bright, too haunted. One soldier whispered, "Feels like walking on glass coffins." Another muttered, "Maybe that's what it is." The sergeant didn't reply. His breath fogged against the icy light, and for the first time, Heinrich saw fear in the man's eyes. Halfway across the field, a sharp crack split the air. The ground dipped. Then another sound followed, deeper this time. The glass was breaking. "Move!" the sergeant shouted. They ran or tried to. Boots slipped, arms flailed. The glass screamed beneath them, splitting into web-like fractures. Heinrich felt the vibration run through his legs, a hum that reached straight into his bones. He grabbed Lucas's arm, hauling him forward just as a section gave way behind them, swallowing two men whole. For a moment, Heinrich saw them beneath the surface, their bodies floating slowly downward, faces pressed against the ice like drowning men who couldn't even scream. Then the crack sealed again with a sound like laughter. When they reached the far edge, the survivors collapsed into the snow, breathing hard, hands shaking. No one spoke for a long while. Lucas finally whispered, "Why didn't the snow bury them?" Heinrich stared back at the shimmering expanse. "Maybe it's afraid." The field glowed faintly behind them, as if lit from below, a frozen memory refusing to fade. Heinrich watched the reflection of the men in the glass, the living and the dead aligned for a heartbeat, like two armies staring at each other through time. If the past can look back at you, does it see regret, or just another survivor waiting to join it? And when the ground beneath your feet remembers death, how do you convince yourself you're still alive? The wind shifted again. The glow dimmed. And for the first time in days, Heinrich realized how quiet his mind had become. Maybe silence wasn't the absence of life. Maybe it was the only mercy left. They turned away, leaving the field of glass to gleam in the dark, a mirror the world would never shatter enough to forget. When dawn came, it wasn't golden. It crawled over the horizon pale and trembling, like the hand of something too weak to rise. The storm had eased, but the world was no kinder for it. Snow stretched in all directions, white, silent, merciless. The survivors marched in single file. What had once been a company was now a handful of men, moving like ghosts who hadn't realized they were already gone. Their breath fogged the air in shallow bursts. Their eyes stared ahead but saw nothing. Heinrich walked at the front. Lucas followed, his steps uneven, his face drawn tight with fever and exhaustion. He clutched something under his coat, the frozen scrap of paper he'd been writing on for days. Heinrich glanced at him. Still at it? Lucas nodded weakly. The words don't come out right. They never do, Heinrich said softly. Write them anyway. They stopped beneath the twisted remains of a birch tree, its bark blackened, its branches brittle as bone. Lucas sat in the snow, hands shaking as he pulled the letter out. The pencil he used was nothing more than a stub. He began to write, slowly, painfully. Each letter pressed into the page like carving on a tombstone. He paused often, staring into the distance, as if searching for the memory of the person he was writing to. Heinrich watched in silence. He remembered his own letter, the one he'd written long ago and never sent, still tucked somewhere in his coat, smudged, soaked, half unreadable. Lucas's voice broke the quiet. Do you think she'll ever get it? Heinrich looked at him. Who? My sister, Lucas said. She used to wait by the window every day. Said she'd know I was alive if the wind blew warm. He smiled faintly. I think she's been cold a long time. The boy's hand trembled. Heinrich reached out and steadied it. Write anyway, he whispered. Even if no one reads it. Lucas nodded and bent back over the page. The pencil moved in tiny, uneven strokes. The words came out crooked but true. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully, tucked it into an envelope, and handed it to Heinrich. In case I don't, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Heinrich took it and placed it inside his coat. I'll deliver it, he promised. The lie came easily, not because he wanted to deceive, but because kindness was the only language left. They rose and walked on. The snow deepened. The air grew thin. By midday, Lucas stumbled and fell. Heinrich knelt beside him, lifting the boy's head into his lap. Lucas's lips moved, but no sound came out. Only a faint breath, a whisper against the frost. Then nothing. Heinrich sat there a long time. He closed the boy's eyes, then pressed the letter against his heart. One last promise he wasn't sure he could keep. That night, by the faint glow of his lantern, he took out his own unfinished letter. The paper was brittle, the ink half frozen. He added one final line. The war will end someday, but I don't know if I will. He signed no name. There was no need. Names were for men who still belonged to the world. He folded both letters, his and Lucas's, and placed them together beneath a rock, marking the spot with his rifle bayonet. Then he stood, looked once more at the horizon, and began to walk. The snow swallowed his footprints almost instantly. Behind him, the wind picked up the loose edges of paper, carrying them across the field like pale wings. If a letter is never read, does it still speak? If a promise dies in the snow, does it echo somewhere warmer? Or do all words, like soldiers, vanish into silence when the war ends? Heinrich didn't know. He only knew the cold no longer frightened him. Not because it had grown gentler, but because it had become familiar. As he disappeared into the white, the letters fluttered once more, then settled. The wind died, and for the first time, the silence felt like peace.